He stood where even kings had fallen. Gandalf the White, armed with new power, prepared to face the Witch-king of Angmar. Yet what he encountered was more than legendary darkness. It was a terror forged from the ruin of whole kingdoms, a wraith corrupted by a ring's promise until humanity vanished. Why did this ancient evil possess a force that could shake Middle-earth's last hope? Unlocking the origins of that fear starts with the Witch King's own doomed ambition. He was a king once, flesh and blood, driven by the hunger that haunts all mortal rulers, the urge to outlast their own bones. In the shadowed courts of the Second Age, Sauron, veiled as the Giver Anatar, offered 9 rings to 9 kings. Each ring shimmered with the promise of endless reign, power unbound by time, and a legacy immune to death. The man who had become the Witch King took his ring with a steady hand, blind to the poison braided into its gold. For a moment, the world bent to his will. Borders shifted, enemies bowed, and whispers of his command reached the farthest corners of his realm. Yet every triumph left a hollow echo. The ring's gifts were never truly his. They were Sauron's bait, forged to ensnare rather than empower. Days blurred into decades. The king's victories grew emptier, his reflection fainter. The ring, once a symbol of mastery, began to gnaw at the roots of his soul. His desires sharpened, but his will no longer belonged to him. Shadows clung to his footsteps, and the world around him chilled. Those closest to him noticed the change first, a coldness in his gaze, a silence where laughter once lived. In the halls of his kingdom, fear replaced loyalty. The man behind the crown faded, replaced by a presence both regal and remote. Other ring-bearers suffered the same fate. The 9 kings, scattered across distant lands, found their ambitions twisted into chains. Their names slipped from memory, replaced by a single, whispered title, Nazgûl. Among them, the former king's hunger for dominion set him apart. Sauron saw in him a weapon sharper than any blade. In time, he would rise above the others, but the cost was steep. His humanity, his freedom, and the last flicker of his own will. The ring that promised everything left him with nothing but shadow. This was the beginning of the Witch King's fall. A mortal's longing turned to ruin, a king's crown dissolving into darkness. The path that led him to Minas Tirith began with a single, fateful choice, a hand outstretched for power, closing around a ring that would unmake him. In the frozen north, far from the bustling lands of Gondor or Rohan, the Witch King carved out a dominion built on dread. Around the year 1300 of the Third Age, he founded Angmar, a realm that existed for one purpose: to grind the remnants of the Dunedain into dust. The seat of his power, Khan Dum, rose among the icy peaks, surrounded by legions of orcs, trolls and men who had turned their backs on the light. From this stronghold, the Witch King became more than a wraith. He was a warlord, orchestrating a campaign that would haunt the North for centuries. Angmar's strategy was never brute strength alone. The Witch King studied the weaknesses of his enemies, waiting for the right moment to strike. Arnor, once a mighty kingdom of the Dunedain, had splintered into 3 fragile states: Rudor, Cardolan, and Arthedain. Old rivalries and suspicion made them easy prey. The Witch King moved first against Rudor, exploiting its ties to the hillmen who despised the Dunedain. By 1409, Rudor had fallen completely, its lords replaced by puppets loyal to Angmar, its lands crawling with the Witch King's minions. Cardolan was next. The Witch King unleashed armies and terror in equal measure, driving the defenders back to the Barrow Downs. The capital fell, and its last prince was slain. The survivors scattered, leaving behind haunted hills where the dead would not sleep. Arthedain, the last and strongest of the three, held on through alliances with Lindon and Rivendell, but the shadow of Angmar pressed closer each year. The Witch King's forces battered its borders, and even the arrival of Gondor's help could only slow the inevitable. The Witch King's genius was not just in conquest, but in psychological warfare. He sowed rumours, turned neighbour against neighbour, and sent plagues to weaken resistance. In 1636, the Great Plague swept through Cardolan, sealing its doom. The Barrow Wights, spirits bound to his will, claimed the abandoned tombs, ensuring the land would never recover. For over 6 centuries, Angmar's presence meant fear itself became a weapon, breaking the will of entire peoples before swords were drawn. By 1974, the last Dunedain kingdom in the north, Arthedain, fell at Fornost. The Witch King's armies overran the city, and the king was driven into exile. Only the intervention of elves and Gondor's distant heirs forced the Witch King to abandon his northern throne. Yet his work was complete. Arna was gone, its people reduced to wandering rangers, its lands ruled by ghosts and memory. The Witch King of Angmar had shown that terror, wielded with patience and cunning, could destroy nations as surely as any blade. Terror was the Witch King's greatest weapon, more infectious than any blade, more corrosive than any siege. Wherever he rode, hope seemed to curdle in the air. The Black Breath, his signature curse, crept through the ranks of defenders like a silent plague. Men felt it before they saw him, a chill that numbed the hands, a heaviness that pressed on the chest, a whisper that maybe this battle had already been lost. The bravest captains faltered, their voices caught in their throats. Even hardened veterans found their will unraveling, as if the Witch King's presence alone could drain the colour from the world. Minas Tirith felt the effect as almost supernatural. As the city's gates groaned under the assault of Grond, the battering ram, named after Morgoth's own hammer, the Witch King did not merely command from the rear. He advanced with a crown of iron set upon an invisible brow, his form cloaked in shadow. When he raised his arms and spoke ancient words of power, the ram struck with a force beyond mortal strength. Each shout from his unseen lips sent a wave of dread through stone and sinew alike. The third time Grond struck, the gates burst asunder. Silence fell, not the hush of anticipation, but the suffocating stillness of spirits broken by fear. The Black Breath was more than a metaphor. Survivors described it as a cold that seeped into the bones, a darkness that clouded the mind. Some collapsed where they stood, unable to lift a sword or remember their own names. Others wandered the streets in a daze, their courage dissolved by the Witch King's unseen touch. In the houses of healing, healers spoke of a shadow that only the rarest hands could lift, a sickness of the soul that no herb could cure. The Witch King wielded prophecy as a shield. Glorfindel's words that warn us that he will not fall by the hand of man echoed across the centuries, turning rumor into certainty, certainty into arrogance. His enemies saw not just a warlord, but a force that could not be slain. The prophecy itself became part of his arsenal, sapping resistance before the first blow was struck. Few dared to face him, and fewer still believed they could win. This was the invader's edge, not only armies of orcs and trolls, but despair itself, wielded with surgical precision. The Witch King's power was a contagion, spreading from mind to mind, stronger than steel. Against such darkness, only the rarest kind of courage could stand. A courage that did not come from strength of arms, but from the fire of hope that refused to be snuffed out. Gandalf the Grey fell with the Balrog in the depths of Moria, locked in a struggle that burned through stone and shadow. For days he battled flame with flame, spirit with spirit, until both were spent at the peak of Zurak-Sigil. There, on the mountain's cold crown, Gandalf's mortal form was broken. Yet death was not the end. He passed out of thought and time, summoned beyond the circles of the world. The Valar sent him back, not as the Grey Wanderer, but as Gandalf the White, reborn with a purpose sharpened by sacrifice. This return was not just a restoration of strength, but a transformation of soul. Gandalf now carried the authority once held by Saruman, but wielded it without pride. He became the chief of the Istari, a living symbol of hope in an age of gathering darkness. His power grew, but so did his restraint. Where the Witch King's strength fed on terror and domination, Gandalf's drew from a deeper well, the courage to inspire, the wisdom to guide, the humility to serve. On his finger rested Narya, the ring of fire, gifted to him by Círdan at the Grey Havens, long before the War of the Ring. Narya was forged not to conquer, but to kindle hearts against despair. Its fire did not scorch the flesh or raze cities. It burned in the spirit, lifting the weary and steadying the frightened. When Gandalf stood among battered defenders at Helm's Deep, at Minas Tirith, in the wild, his presence alone was a shield against the cold grip of fear. The ring's true power was subtle, almost invisible, yet it spread through the ranks like dawn's warmth after a night of dread. Gandalf's philosophy set him apart from those who craved domination. He refused the One Ring, knowing that even the purest intentions could curdle into tyranny. His greatest victories came not from force, but from igniting hope, where only shadows lingered. He called forth the strength of others, Theoden roused from despair, Aragorn claiming his birthright, Frodo pressing on beneath the weight of the ring. Gandalf's leadership was a quiet flame, refusing to be snuffed out even as the Witch King's darkness thickened. At the gates of Minas Tirith, as the air grew heavy with the Witch King's malice, Gandalf's stand was more than a contest of sorcery or will. It was the meeting of two ancient fires, one that sought to consume and enslave, and one that refused to yield, lighting the way for others. In that moment, hope became a weapon as real as any sword, a force that could match terror and, in time, outlast it. Grond, the battering ram forged in the memory of Morgoth's own hammer, crawled forward on wheels as thick as tree trunks, its iron wolf head glinting in the firelight. Each roll thundered against the flagstones, shaking the city from its roots to its highest tower. The defenders of Minas Tirith, battered and sleepless, pressed against the walls, hands trembling on spear shafts. Above them, the air thickened with dread, a silence that pressed in like a weight, broken only by the distant, hollow beat of war drums. At the shattered gate, the Witch-king waited astride his monstrous mount, a fell beast with leathery wings stretched wide against the pallid sky. His crown of iron floated above a void where no face could be seen, and his presence pulled the heat from the air, leaving only a biting cold. He raised his arms and spoke words older than the hills, words that twisted the mind and gnawed at the soul. Grond crashed against the gate once, twice, and then a third time. With every cry, the ram struck harder until the gates, often reinforced over centuries, splintered as if they were made of brittle ice. Stone and wood exploded inward. The path to the heart of Gondor stood open. For a moment, no one moved. The Witch-king passed through the ruin, a shadow crowned in iron, and the defenders shrank from him, unable to lift their swords. The black breath rolled ahead, a chill that left men gasping, some falling to their knees, others frozen in place by terror. Despair spread like a sickness, and hope seemed to flicker out, snuffed by the mere presence of the Lord of the Nazgûl. Gandalf waited astride Shadowfax, white robes shining in the gloom. Staff in hand, he alone did not yield to the darkness. The Witch-king halted before him, mace in hand, a voice like grinding stone echoing through the broken gate. "Old fool," he cried, "this is my hour. Do you not know death when you see it?" The air between them crackled with unseen force, light clashing with shadow, will against will. Then, from beyond the city, a sound split the silence. The horns of Rohan, clear and defiant, rising above the ruin. The Witch-king's gaze turned, his attention drawn toward the new threat pouring onto the fields. For a heartbeat, the spell of despair faltered. The city breathed again, and Gandalf held the line. Hope kindled, even as darkness pressed in. In that instant, power and resistance stood eye to eye, each testing the other's limits in the ruins of the White City. A battered shield shatters beneath the Witch-king's mace. Theoden lies crushed, his horse slain. Smoke and screams swirl across the Pelennor fields, but two figures stand in defiance where all others have fallen back. A hobbit, small and trembling, and a warrior in the armor of Rohan. The Witch-king towers above them, his crown of iron floating over a void where no face should be. He lifts his weapon and declares, "No living man may hinder me." His words ring with the force of prophecy, centuries old, believed unbreakable. Yet it is not a man who answers. Owen throws back her helm, golden hair are flashing in the dawn, her voice clear as steel. She cries, "But no living man am I." The Witch-king hesitates, arrogance faltering for the first time. He swings his mace. Eowyn's shield arm breaks under the blow, but she does not fall. A
Behind him, Merry, overlooked and nearly forgotten, gathers what courage he has left. In his hand is a blade from the Barrow Downs, forged long ago by the enemies of Angmar, steeped in spells meant to undo the Witch King's sorcery. Merry plunges the blade behind the knee, cutting through unseen sinew, breaking the ancient magic that binds the Wraith's form. The Witch King reels, his defences undone in an instant by a hobbit's hand. Eowyn rises, her pain blazing in her eyes, and drives her sword through the shadow under the crown. Steel meets emptiness. The crown falls, clattering to the blood-soaked earth, and a cry of rage and horror echoes across the field before fading into silence. The prophecy, twisted by pride, unravels at the hands of those he never thought to fear. The terror that once choked the city lifts. Orcs and men falter, their master's shadow gone. In the end, it was not kings or wizards who brought down the Lord of the Nazgûl, but the courage of the overlooked, the humble, the underestimated, those who refuse to be ruled by fear.
In Middle-earth and in our own, the greatest threats rarely announce themselves with brute force, but with the slow corrosion of hope. Today, power still tempts, corrupts, and divides, while courage often rises from unexpected places. The lesson endures, darkness adapts, but so must those who resist it. In every era, the true battle is for the spirit. What would you stand against when hope feels lost?